Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Opapari, and this is the Songwriters on Process podcast. Since 2010, I've been interviewing songwriters about their writing process. And on this podcast, we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process. Far deeper than the usual. Do you start with the lyrics or the music question? By way of background, I have a PhD in English literature, and I'm a prose writer myself. I'm not a songwriter. In fact, I've never written a song in my life. But my goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers and poets, just as writers, plain and simple, and have always been interested in the writing process. This is an intelligent conversation between two writers. And on this podcast, like I said, we go deep into the process. We talk about rituals, the seeds of inspiration, the role of movement on the process, writer's block, the revision process, pens, pencils, types of paper, and of course, we talk about books. You can find all the archived interviews on the Songwriters on Podcast website and across all streaming platforms. And with that, let's dive into this week's episode. And today we have Eva Hendricks of Charly Bliss on the podcast. The new album by Charly, Bliss, Forever, is out August 16th on Lucky Number Records. That is tomorrow as I record this. I hope you can hear the enthusiasm in this interview. I enjoyed the hell out of this, but wow, there's such enthusiasm for the creative process with Hendricks, and I love that about this interview. I think that comes across in the voice, in both of our voices, but she loves to create. And that's very obvious in her answers. There's not a question here of writing sometimes when she feels like it. By her own account, she said she's relates to the world by writing. She's always writing and always creating. She wrote a YA novel. Journaling is a big part of her creative process. So there's no question here of writing when she feels like it. It sounds like she always feels like it. But when she doesn't, it's fine. There's no anxiety there because she knows it'll happen eventually. In fact, she tells a story here during when they wrote the song "Waiting for You." She wrote 50 different verses for it until she got to the right one. 50. And we had the inevitable discussion about writing when engaging in creating ideas when we're engaging in monotonous activities. And she said she gets ideas when she's hanging laundry. I've heard folding laundry. I've never heard hanging laundry, but I love that. Again, love this interview. Love the enthusiasm. I love the album Forever out on Lucky Number Records. It is great. And so check it out. Check out the podcast, my interview with Eva Hendricks of Charly Bliss. Let's start with this. Are you an everyday type of writer? Do you feel like you have to create in some fashion or just when the mood strikes? I find that songwriters tend to be of the, don't push it because when you push it, you just get stuff that's crap. And others say you got to push through no matter how bad it is. You got to do something every day in some fashion. So where do you fall in that category?
I would say I'm a very phasey songwriter. It really comes in waves for me. And I think I can go months without writing a song and then come back to it and feel really like I have so much that I want to say. And I really believe in allowing yourself to have phases like that. So many questions I get, like when I have talked to young songwriters, are about like, how do I overcome writer's block? And I actually really believe in writer's block as like a great indication that sometimes you have just written too much. You are so much of writing song lyrics is tied to like your own experiences of life and, whatever. And I can always tell when I'm ready to write songs because I literally feel like my brain is like a fish tank that's like all full of water and the water like has to be drained. And whereas I think there's just times when I'm like, there is nothing there. I need to live a bit and refill the fish tank. And so I really believe in like allowing the phases to work like that. But when I am in a phase of writing songs and a lot of songs, I feel like my brain just gets into a rhythm of like, I'm listening for lyrics. I'm listening to my own thoughts in such a way that like I'm constantly like on the hunt. So it turns into an everyday sort of a practice. Maybe not so much sitting down and actually start to finish writing a song, but more so just like the mindset that I'm in. I'm listening for all of that and I'm thinking about it and I'm turning lyrics over in my head. And I have OCD and I'm realizing like how much of that is tied to my songwriting process, especially as a lyricist. I can feel when something's just not quite exactly what I want to say. And it drives me crazy until I can get to exactly that point of like the perfect way of saying it, the perfect way of distilling down something perfect insofar, whatever that means to me. But yeah, so I think when I'm in a phase of songwriting, that is constantly going on in my brain. And then when I'm not in the phase of songwriting, it is like couldn't be farther.
So there's no anxiety there. I mean, I think that's interesting that, after a while, if you're not creating,
Mhm.
you're okay with that. You don't feel like, okay, it's been a long time. I should be doing something. Do you ever get that anxiety?
Of course, but I also have learned that, like, first of all, I find that the way that like being in a band works kind of matches that sort of, you know, those phases really well. Sometimes you're in a period of writing, and sometimes you're in a period of recording, and then sometimes you're in a period of making music videos, and sometimes you're in a period of touring. Like it's like there is a very natural cycle that sort of coincides with that. And I find usually an album release culminates in you touring for a very long time. And usually by the end of that phase of touring, I'm starting to, because I'm around music so much, because I'm playing so much, because we're performing these songs, we're in front of an audience, pretty naturally, I start to think about songs and like, oh, you know what's really missing from the set is this type of song or like this kind of like emotional moment. Or we're listening to tons of music together in the van. And we're sort of on the same page about, oh, like I really, like, oh, we love that song. Like, I wish we could write a song like that. And then it sort of just starts naturally kind of like simmering in your brain in a way that I think leads really well into returning to the writing phase. And it's really interesting because I think I have at times like really wrestled with, like, I feel in some ways that I like fell into songwriting. And I've wrestled a little bit with this idea of like, am I good enough at this to really consider myself a songwriter? Am I good enough to consider myself a musician? But the pandemic was actually a really interesting phase for me because I was in Australia. I didn't know anyone. I couldn't have been more separated from this career that I had built with my friends and my brother. And what I fell back into naturally without any real like reason to be doing it is like writing a lot of songs. I wrote a young adult novel over the pandemic and like I'm realizing it's just like I can try as hard as I want. I can't squash that part of myself. So I'm learning to really trust that the older I get of like I can take as long away from it as I want. I cannot change that this is part of myself and how I relate to the world is writing. And I trust that it will come back, like it will reemerge.
Yeah. Uh, okay. So I wanted to actually ask about that novel because I didn't know that. So you wrote a YA novel. So, it- um, back to that idea, like if you read interviews with prose writers, like they will never say, I just write when the mood strikes. Like they all have that discipline of I write X number of pages and X number of words. And I knew we did that for our book too. There was a kind of that kind of discipline. I don't think any prose writer will say, yeah, write when you feel like it. But songwriters rarely say that. I think they're more along the lines of what you do. So when you were writing that novel, I'm curious, was there more discipline to that? Yeah. How did you, I'd love to know where did that,
Yeah, I wrote 1,000 words a day, no matter what. So
okay,
that
that's what
was
you did.
very disciplined. But also, I had to accept that there would be phases where I would have to take a break because I needed to write Charly Bliss songs and I needed to go back and record in the studio for a couple months and whatever. So I guess it's sort of what I mean about phases. It's like I think when I'm working on any one creative thing, I've realized that I need to give myself over to it 100%. And I need to really be in that headspace. And it's hard for me to do two at the same time. So once I have decided like I am in a songwriting phase, I am actually very disciplined. It's like I'm less so waiting for the mood to, it's like more so like the mood is striking. Here comes a phase. Now let's be disciplined. And same with writing the book. It's like, okay, I know that I have X number of weeks where I won't need to write anything Charly Bliss related. Now I can really tap into this part of my brain and really get a lot of work done. And yeah, and in that sense, I was doing like 1,000 words a day, no matter what. And that was really helpful for me because, yeah, as you know, book writing is really daunting. It's so different than writing a song. I mean, I like to think that some of the skills, I mean, obviously, yes, a lot of the skills that I think I use in songwriting did translate into novel writing, but also there's just nothing like, I mean, you can look at a song on a single page and be like, here's what's working, here's what's not working, and edit it pretty quickly because you're just reading it over and over again. That's very easy. The process of literally like that I hadn't anticipated about book writing, it's like you have to read your own book so many times over, and it just takes so long to be like, okay, like I'm just going to get a sense of like, the whole project and really whatever. That takes so much time. You cannot possibly hold all of it in your head at the same time. And that is just so different.
You're right. And I had a process where I would, like, when I was revising chapters, I'd only do it twice a day, but I would give myself like 12 hours. And so I'd do it in the morning and the night because I knew that if I did it like in the afternoon, I was still too close to what I saw in the morning. And it was, and I, yeah, and it was kind of, but I had that, that's all, I've always been that way. It's kind of only a certain number of times a day because if you read it too often, you know what's coming next. And you know, in the revision process, you have to kind of surprise yourself. And it reminds me of I had Mary Timony on the podcast a couple of months ago, and she's sometimes songwriters say things to me that like stick forever. And she said that she writes in the morning, and then she revises it. She said, "I write in the morning. I hate what I write. Always hate what I write." And I revise at night because at night I'm a different person. And she said, because things during the day have changed me and I wasn't the same person in the morning. And I was like, that's mind blowing because most people would just say, like, she actually, like, whatever experiences she had during that day in those 10 or 12 hours made her different from what she was in the morning. And so when she revised at night, she felt almost like that's a new person looking at it. And that just kind of like blew my mind.
Wow. I mean, it's real.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful and so true. And I think like we would all be better off to like think of life that way. Like we're all constantly being changed by our environment. And like, I think that's brilliant as a writer. I do think there's so like, you know, whether that's like I go to sleep and wake up and look at it with fresh eyes or whatever, like that is so important, being able to separate yourself enough from what you're writing that you are sort of looking at it as a different person, not get too entrenched in it. But it is kind of interesting too, because I actually feel like when I'm lyric writing, for the most part, I cannot separate from it until I have found the exact phrase I'm looking for. Like I cannot put it down, even if I've like, okay, like I am closing the book and I'm putting it down and walking away from it. It will just be looping in my head for days and all night. And like first thing when I wake up until I'm like, there's the phrase. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So that sounds like a much healthier perspective on it. But yeah,
it takes, but actually, you know, you said something earlier that you said that, you know, you'll set something aside and come back to it later. So how do you know when it's time to set it aside? I mean, I agree with that 100%. I mean, you know, I find that time, but I still struggle with knowing when should I push through? When should I set it aside? And then there's a question of, do I set it aside because it's awful, or do I set it aside because it's good and I just need fresh eyes? So I don't know. You said that earlier, and I'm really interested in that idea of of how important distance is, and when do you know if you should, when do you come back to it? And I don't know, just all those things.
That's so interesting. So there's a song on the record called Waiting for You. And I can't think of another song in Charly Bliss history that we wrote. I think we wrote about like 50 different verses for it. I mean, Sam had written this chorus that we loved, and we wanted to believe in it so much because we loved this chorus, and we just could not find the verse that set it up well. And I think for that song, I did put it aside many times and come back to it. And I think for me, it was when I was like, I hate this song. Was when I was like, I have to put this away. It was when I had truly hit a point of despising the song and despising myself and the ideas I was coming up with for this verse, melody, and lyric, that I felt like there's nothing that can come of it. It's almost like when you're in a fight with someone and you're like, no, I actually do have to go to bed angry because there is nothing good that's going to come from me working on this at this point. And it ended up being that when I finally wrote the verse that we ended up going with, that we fell in love with, it was after months of not touching it. I had been in America for a while. I'd come back to Australia, which is where I do most of my writing now. Just because I feel like I have more space, both like physically and mentally to write. I like picked up a guitar, and like the first idea that I had was like, there it is. Like, but it was only because I had left it alone for 6 months or something. Like after deciding, like, don't even say that song. Don't even bring that song up to me. I fucking hate that song. I will not work on it, whatever. And then had the time to like come back around to it. And it appeared, it was obvious.
So that's something that, so when things aren't working, you do set them aside and then say, I'll come back to this at some point.
I guess so. Yeah. I would say like overall, that is not my like typical way of working with songs. But I think there is a difference between, so the songwriting in Charly Bliss works like one of several ways. Either like Sam and I are the primary songwriters in the band, and I think when it's a song that I have written start to finish, like melodies, lyrics, everything, I tend to work more in the way I was describing earlier of I will not put it down. I cannot stop until it's correct. I cannot show it to anyone until it's correct, like whatever. And I will just work until I'm like, fine, this is it. But with Sam's songs, his melodies are very different than what I would normally gravitate towards. And I write lyrics and melody at the same time, typically. So when he writes a melody and then I have to place lyrics to it, sometimes like my process, I would say like to approaching a song would be very different in that sense. And in, with a song like Waiting for You, where he had written the chorus and then we were struggling to find a verse, it's more of a collaborative thing of like, he's hearing something in his head of like what he's imagining is the right thing. I'm hearing something of what I like, what would be my instinct. And we have to not only like achieve what we would on our own think of as like right, we have to like do a sibling mind meld and like meet somewhere in the middle. And that I would say is a case where I would sometimes have to put it away and come back to it.
So I'm guessing you have just a phone full of voice memos, right?
Yeah.
And yes.
Yes.
So yeah, and I love this question and these responses because most songwriters say to me, I wish I had a sense of organization, but there's no organization. And they just have that. I mean, there's the rare songwriter who tells me, oh, it's filed by this and this. I mean, there are very few.
You're Miss Cuomo.
Yes. And I'm trying to think who are the ones. Lauren Mayberry from Churches told me she has an Excel file, a spreadsheet, which I thought was amazing. Yeah, and there were a couple, but most of them are not like that. Most of them are, you know, I put these things in there and then I have to frantically search for where it was, and there's no organization. And now that I think about it, the ones that do, it's typically there are emoji rankings, and they have that system. And it's
Try that.
you should. It's hilarious to hear what people's filing system is if they have one. So I guess that's a long way of saying, is there any sense of organization to those voice memos?
Barely. Um, but sometimes I will write like in all caps, like, Eva, this is good. Come back to this. Like that, like with like 7 exclamation points or something. Other than that, no. And sometimes I've had to, like, like when we're putting out an album, sometimes it's fun to like go back to the original voice memo of a song that became something, whatever. And I am kicking myself for the fact that I've done nothing to be like, oh, like this is this demo or whatever. Like, so I have to go one by one and listen to all of them. And sometimes, honestly, that's like how I find like, oh, that was actually a good idea. That
Right.
like thing I filmed in the shower 3 years ago. Maybe I will come back to that. And I kind of have developed a certain amount of faith in that process of like, if I'm meant to find these things again, I will find them again. And I'm also a big journaler. And that has been a big part of my process overall. Is like I save every journal. Like I have journals from back when I was in college and in high school and things. And a lot of it is gobbledygook that is totally like embarrassing and humiliating. And I really do hope that my friends, if I get hit by a bus, just like burn them and don't ever let anyone look at them. But I do find often that like one phrase that I wrote so long ago, I'll come back to and be like, that was there it is. That's the key. So, and I think there is something that like, even if like I probably would be a happier and more well-adjusted person if I had a better filing system, I actually think like being forced to look through pages and pages and pages of my own doodles, my own like, ideas that I had in the shower or whatever is actually a good part of the process that like will be inspiring in some way. So I'm reluctant to change it, but I very much admire people who are more organized than me. They're probably much happier.
So do you use journals? Do you mine them, regularly for song ideas?
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you have a discipline for the journaling? Because a lot of songwriters tell me they journal too, but actually, no. It's 3 categories. Some songwriters tell me that they journal, others tell me that they don't, they have no desire to, and then there's some that say, I don't, but I really wish I did. So is there a page or a word, or you just kind of do until you feel like you've run out of steam?
I think it's very much phasey for me. Like with everything with like sometimes I'm just like, there will be a moment that I'm like, I will want to remember exactly how I feel right now. And I will, whether it's like a paragraph or just like, I'm really going through it right now. So I wrote like 6 pages or something. Like I find that when I'm going through something really big in my life, I am very compelled to journal and work it out. When I met my now fiance, I have like an entire journal that is detailing like everything I was thinking during that time, because I just felt like my world is being turned upside down. And I guess I felt like I had to write it all down and be like, whatever. And sometimes like it takes a while before I can look back at it because it's too like, the mushy middle of everything. It's like, I usually think that like the most compelling things I can write come from me having some perspective on the events of my life. And usually when I'm like right in the thick of it, my thoughts are not all that interesting. But I do think like having record of that is very helpful because like, even if I would not want anyone else to see it but me, being like having a written document that can take me back to like, ooh, I remember exactly that, like the full scope of that awful feeling will put me in the right place to write a song that feels really like, you know, the emotional immediacy is there, but I am okay. And I can have enough perspective to carry out the full scope of the thought instead of just like, I feel like shit, you know?
Right. Now, speaking of, we talked about the Talking Heads earlier, and Jerry Harrison told me that he loves to write with a felt tip pen. It's got to be a felt tip pen because he likes the sensation of the scraping on the paper, which is blue. You know, he's also a visual artist, so I think there's that. But he said it has to be felt tip because he loves that scraping sensation. So, are you a pen and paper person or a computer person when it comes to writing?
If I'm writing in a journal, it has to be a Pilot '07 pen.
I love it. I know. What about color? Wait, I may even have that. No, I've entered. Well, no, I have a Pentel here. This is my pen of choice. But isn't it hilarious how specific we are?
Yeah.
Ah, what about color? Does that matter?
Has to be black. Has to be like a very like inky pen. I can't use just like a standard just like like the pen that they have at like the doctor's office. I'm trying to think like what what that even is, but like gross. Something about like, because you have to write quick, like you have to write quickly, like as you are, like as the thoughts are pouring out of you. And if I feel like the pen is like holding me back or like dragging me behind, can you tell I have a mental disorder? Yeah, I'm like, oh, I can't. But yeah, it's pretty funny that, and I do, if I'm out in the world, my notes app is also the other thing that like, it would destroy me if I found out someone was reading through my notes app. But you have to have it because a lot of the time, I think when you're a songwriter or writer of any kind, it is like so much of it is just like existing in the world with your ear tuned in to like, oh, the way my friend just expressed that feeling is perfect. Like, and I have to remember this. Or like, I'm walking and like, I just had a thought that's like, oh, I will want to come back to this one day and whatever. And your notes app is, wait, you don't want to be the asshole that's like, let me pull out my notebook and get this in the privacy of my own home. I'm happy to do that, but I can't start doing that.
Yeah. I had Britt Daniel on a couple of years ago, and he told me this great story about how he will sit in a bar with his laptop and listen to conversations. And I was just imagining like him Britt Daniel in a bar on his laptop. And, I thought, how amazing is that? He's like, I'll just listen and then write things down when people say them. I thought that was so amazing. Like he's that hypersensitive. Yeah.
I do think so much of songwriting, and I think like more and more, towards where we are right now, like over the last 10 years, whatever, has become so much like I feel like the gold standard of writing at this point in a lot of ways is like being able to write in a way that feels like you could, like it could be a conversation that you overheard. Like, oh, like I have said that before. Oh my God. Like, but like, I'm thinking about like that Noah Kahn song, like it's so much of it is like bits of conversation or whatever. Like I ran into your mom. She forgot that I exist. Like little details like that feel so like, oh, like that happened to me today. Not just like these huge moments in life, but sort of like bringing it down to like the micro everyday experiences that we all have. And it destroys me in songwriting when someone does that effectively, like takes a piece of a conversation that feels like, I have said those words, like, oh my God, you've read my mind. And Taylor Swift obviously does that.
So you mentioned the shower, and there was an article in the Washington Post about a year ago about why we get our best ideas in the shower. And I've got some quotes over here from writers. And Agatha Christie once said, the best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes. So this is a very common thing with songwriters and writers too, and the whole point about the shower thing is that our ideas come to us when we're engaged in an unconscious activity that requires no conscious thought. So for me, absolutely. When I'm doing things, this is when, and again, another Talking Heads reference. David Byrne said a car is a good place to write lyrics. Driving occupies one part of the brain, freeing up the other. So
I'm so happy to talk about this.
Yeah. So, and so I'll give you examples. Like I've heard gardening, folding laundry, cooking, a million things, but I'm just fascinated by, those ideas coming to us when we're not thinking about them. So yeah, please go ahead.
Oh my God. I'm so happy to talk about this. Yes, exactly. I mean, I think that is like the most important part of writing lyrics is like recognizing that you do have to like get up and do something else. Most of the time, I think I can get like a lot of the time what I'll do is I'll get a song to like 60% there and then I'll go try and do something else. And like I said, like I cannot turn off the part of my brain that is like, whether in the forefront or in the background, still turning this over and like chewing on these ideas. So vivid memory of I wrote my favorite parts of our song 19, the lyrics, while I was hanging our laundry on the line, because their dryers are way less common in Australia. I guess like a very, very energy efficient, like taking advantage of all the sunshine to hang your laundry outside. I was pegging our laundry on like the line and I was like, that is the whole song. The whole song just came to me and I like ran back inside and was like, whoa, write it down. But really the biggest shift I would say for my songwriting practice on this record has been the fact that I have a car again for the first time since I was a teenager. I was living in New York for 10 years before I moved to Australia. So there was no reason for me to, I mean, we had our van and whatever, but like, I'm terrified of driving the van. But I do have a car here now. And I would drive whenever I was really stumped on a song lyrically. I would drive to this place that is like 45 minutes from us called Natural Bridge. It's this like beautiful, very easy hike. And I found that the amount of time that it took to drive there was like the perfect amount of time to really like, and it's very easy driving. I don't have to really focus. It's a lot of like driving through big cane fields with like no other cars on the road. It was the perfect way to distract myself just enough that I could come up with some really good lyrics. And that was like, I think like my memories of writing this record are so positive because I had so much more space to do things like that. Like in New York is like obviously a great, very well documented, creative place to live. And I treasure those experiences as well. But like having space and also like living way less on top of other people, like being able to really like sing loudly and not annoy my neighbors or my roommates or whatever. My memories of writing this album were so positive because I was able to do the things that we're talking about. I was outside. I was like, my life was so much bigger in so many ways. And I think my songwriting really benefited from that.
I could see the tension there being, though, that the second you do those things because they involve no forethought, those driving or the folding, the hanging of laundry, it almost becomes a conscious activity. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, because, okay, I can't think of anything, I'll go fold some laundry. And so as you're folding, I'm not folding,
Yes.
as you're hanging laundry, you're expecting it to happen. So I feel like there'd be a tension there of when you acknowledge that thing, it no longer,
Yes, absolutely.
right?
It was like, I did it for 19 and then I tried to do it again and it was like not working because my brain was like, okay, like think of it, whatever. But that's why I think like that longer drive worked really well for me because the first 20 minutes would be that. I would be driving the car and I'd be like, why isn't it happening? Why am I not getting these ideas? Whatever. And then I'd get so frustrated. I'd be like, I give up. I'm just going to go on like a nice hike and whatever. And then it would come. And I think like, even just whether it was if I started to get really locked into a certain thing, it would stop working. Like we live really close to the beach. At first it would really work if I was like, I'm just going to go lie on the beach, like enjoy being like reading on the beach or whatever. And then it'll come and then it would stop working. But luckily there's plenty of activities around here. So I never really fully ran out of like things that would work. And, yeah, I think sometimes too, like you do really have to get to the place where you're like, I give up. I'm not trying this anymore. I'm not actively trying this. And then that is when it will come. And that is like a practice within yourself, like of like, oh, really being able to be like, I'm not like tricking myself. I'm not being like, I give up, songwriting gods. Like, see me, I'm not trying at all anymore. Like, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
really being like, I'm putting this down.
Yeah.
Cooking, all of it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And, you know, that reminds me also, I think that there's kind of two categories of people, those who use those, you say cooking or like visual art. You know, a lot of songwriters or visual artists on the side, they never use the visual art as a way to like generate song ideas. It's always a deliberate break from it. Like their brain needs the break. And so they do that thing specifically as a way of anti-songwriting. And that's the way then
Not about writing the book. I was
yeah,
like,
really.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like, no, like, absolutely different part of my brain, even though same part, but like, it felt like I could not do both at the same time. Like,
Yeah.
there was like one completely prevented me from doing the other. So I don't know. But like, yeah, that was a great brain break for me, was like
Yeah.
writing, using the same part of my brain for something completely different and not trying to pressure myself to do both at the same time was actually like a very healthy shift.
How important is the ritual to your process? Time of day, things you have to have with you, favorite chair, favorite room. Does that matter to you?
No, not at all. The only thing I need is to be completely alone. Like, we've done writing sessions with like other artists and other writers in the room, and I really, it's something I really want to improve upon, like my ability to think and focus with other people in the room. But ultimately, I know that my best songwriting comes when there is no one home and I can really lock into a place where I'm like, no one can hear me. No one is like judging my thinking face, where I'm like completely like lights out deep within myself. That is all that matters, is just having space to be completely alone in my own thoughts. Or even if I'm in public in a way that like no one is, you know what I mean? Like on the subway in New York or whatever, like no one's looking at me. No one's like, you know, I'm not like talking to another person. There's no other person like around, whatever.
The time of day, you could do it any time of day.
Any time of day.
Nice.
Cannot write a single word if I have had even a drop of alcohol in my system.
Really?
Completely, like, I've several times throughout my 20s was like, you know, reading memoirs about like insert whatever artist is like, I drank a bottle of wine and wrote like the best, like, so, and I was like, I could be that too. And all that would end up happening is I'd be like, I drink a bottle of wine and I can't focus on shit. Like, I don't have like a thought in my brain. I have like, alcohol has never helped me. Smoking pot, anything, like nothing has ever helped me. I have to be like very sober. And yeah, that's about it.
But can I tell you something? The songwriters who tell me one of the questions I will ask occasionally is, what's the emotional state that you're most productive in? The number of songwriters who tell me they write great when they're hungover. And I don't, yeah, but so why is that? Like, and I'll tell you what they say, and I don't agree with it at all. That's not me. I could never do it. But I guess there's something about you're so inside your head. I don't know. But okay, so you maybe have a theory.
I think you are a little bit dumb when you're hungover. You are like not operating at full brain capacity. And sometimes that is very beneficial because you're not getting in your own way. Like the extra energy that would normally allow you to overthink things and like, you know, overcomplicate things in your brain is sort of gone. And you are just exhausted enough that that diminished capacity is actually to your advantage. You're like, this is right. This first thought that I had, like, don't overthink it. It's the right thing there. And I think that is actually very beneficial.
That's the best answer I've heard. That actually is the best answer I've heard. And that makes total sense that you don't have the energy to overthink it. That's amazing. Okay, last question. I see books behind you, and I love talking, writing, reading with songwriters. I find they're typically voracious readers. I will just give you briefly to start the conversation my reading habits. I mean, I think if I don't read every day, I get very anxious. I have to read every day. Um, I am not an author person, so when I read something, my first instinct when I finish it, like a novel, isn't I want to read something else by that person. It's always, I want another voice in my head, which is why I love reading anthologies by different authors. Because if I read like a short story anthology by different authors, it's 23 different voices in my head. But that's just me. So I'd love to know what your reading habits are.
Definitely, I find that I am most productive when I am reading as a writer, whether that's working on the book or working on our songs. I think I so agree with you. I think it's so beneficial to have someone else's voice in your head. I think for the period when we were really in the thick of writing forever, I read 50 books that year and was reading about like a book a week, and that was really helpful. And then now I'm reading way less this year just because so much of my life is more so about like logistics and okay, like we have to make this music video, we have to like do these interviews, we have to like whatever. But as a writer, I feel like it's the most common advice that anyone ever gives is like, the more you're reading, the better writer you will be. And agree, I'm not so much, I mean, I do feel like if I read a book that I really fall in love with, I will definitely go back and try to read a lot of what that author has written. I've just over last summer, I think like everyone else in the world, I fell in love with Anne Patchett's Tom Lake and went back and like I'd never read anything else she had written and went back and read a lot of her stuff. And she actually came and we do a Charly Bliss book club through our Patreon. And like she came and talked to the Charly Bliss book club, was just so cool. And she was so awesome. I am currently reading a book called Big Swiss that is really awesome. It's about like a transcriptionist who works for a sex therapist and she starts meeting all of the clients in person. It's very hilarity ensues. I love to read. As an anxious person, I think it is like one of the best things that like regulates my nervous system. And yeah, hugely tied to my writing process for sure.
How do you pick what you want to read? Honestly, I just I look at book review websites and look at the plot and think, okay, that's something. So I'm no more complicated than that. So how do you pick what you want to read?
Honestly, a lot of my close friends are big readers, and I feel like a lot of the people I follow on Instagram are big readers. And I feel like it's pretty easy. Like if I start seeing everyone posting about a book, I'm like, okay, cool. Like there's a few people that I'm like, if they really love it, I'm probably going to love it too. So also obviously I'm like a Goodreads super fan. So I am a very forgetful person. I have to put it in the list of like things I want to read, whatever. And sometimes if I'm like really whatever, I'll go back and like look at like, oh, 5 years ago, I wanted to read this book. Like, perfect. Now's the time. And I do think, I don't know, like I think if you're, excuse me, if you're a writer, I do think some of you has to believe in the mysticism of the process of like, because we will never know. Like, why do we sometimes get like the best idea and then for weeks get no ideas or whatever? Like it is in part a magical thing that is very unknowable. And I guess I kind of believe the same thing about books. I really do believe overall that books find you at the right time in your life. And I have experienced it way too many times to not believe that that is real. Like a book that you've been meaning to read for years, suddenly you pick it up and you're like, had I read this 5 years ago, I would not have even like, based on what I'm going through right now in my life, this is like the perfect book for me to be reading right now. So I believe in that. I believe books find you at the right time and to get in touch with that.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget my book, Desolation, a heavy metal memoir by Mark Morton with Ben Opapari, that is me, comes out June 25th on Hachette Books. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is one of the guitarists in the band Lamb of God, and this is his memoir. It's a damn good book, if I do say so myself. But again, that book is out June 25th on Hachette Books. You can pre-order it now everywhere, your favorite online bookstore. So be sure to do that. The site, Songwriters on Podcast, contains all of the archived episodes of the podcast. Of course, you can find them on all streaming platforms as well, but they're also on the site. I only have had the podcast for about I don't think even 2 years. Before that, all of the interviews were transcribed, and that took a lot of work. And that's why I started the podcast. So if you want to read the interviews that I did before the podcast, they are on Songwriters on Podcast as well. There are about 200 of them going back to 2010. So check those out. If you want to get a hold of me, Ben at songwritersonprocess.com, or fill out a form on the website. I'm here for your questions, your complaints, your concerns, or your interview suggestions. I'd love getting those as well. So hit me up. I will try to respond. So that's it, everyone. Have a great day and see you next time.